Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing from topics from across the world. As claims of drastically cheaper drug prices circulate and leadership shifts between RFK Jr. heading the health department, concerns grow over science being overshadowed by ideology. Deep cuts to NIH, CDC, and global health and aid raise alarms about the future of vaccine innovation and America's scientific infrastructure. The policies in place risk undermining healthcare quality and weakening the foundation of U.S. medical leadership. Joining us now is Dr. Mariana Socal, Associate Professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She's an expert in pharmaceutical access and affordability. Her work focuses on global drug supply chains, gene therapies, and policies to control spending without limiting the access. She has testified before Congress and the FDA and services on the WHO's Advisory Group on Medicine Pricing. Today she discusses drug pricing claims, cuts to research funding, and their impact on healthcare and innovation in the U.S. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Mariana Socal. My first question to you is, President Trump has said that he made drugs up to 1,500% cheaper. Do you see any truth in his claim, or is it a pure political theater, according to you?
Well, thank you so much for having me. There's one big problem about drug prices in the United States, and that problem is that drug prices are not transparent. So nobody truly knows how much a drug costs. There is a difference between what drug manufacturers charge for the drugs and confidential negotiations for what is called rebates and discounts that manufacturers provide to insurance companies. These are confidential, and so often they are also depending on metrics and milestones, such as a sales of a certain number of units in a given quarter, and so on. So any pricing cuts that can be seen in the United States would be interpreted as cuts in the price of what the manufacturers are charging. These prices are typically more publicly available, even though they don't represent the final price that insurers are paying. We haven't seen a lot of changes in what manufacturers are announcing. Some drug companies have announced that they will cut prices, but have not been specific about which drugs and which specific prices will be cut and by how much. We know from the past that in previous years, particularly insulin manufacturers, when they cut prices, they made announcements many months in advance, and they made it very publicly known how much they were cutting and for which specific products. That type of behavior we have not yet seen in the current moment.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Mariana. And with RFK Jr. now running the health department, how concerned are you about science taking a backseat to ideology?
Well, I think there are many changes to the agencies happening right now. There are very positive changes with respect to clarity and inspections and incentives for U.S. domestic manufacturing. These are changes that have been occurring in the pharmaceutical space. But of course, there is a balance between those changes and the whole issue of prices. And I should mention that drug prices are a serious problem in the U.S. that so far have had no strong solution. Drug prices on average in the U.S. are 3 to 4 times higher than other countries. And these prices really impact affordability. I mean, Americans, year after year, consistently say, about 1 in 4 Americans say they could not afford a drug that they needed because of price. So I think the issue of drug prices should be still part of the policy priorities of the current administration, and we all as consumers should be monitoring that.
And Dr. Mariana, now is the Trump-Kennedy health agenda, now you've also mentioned it in your previous answer, but is America, this new agenda pushing America towards cheaper care or cheaper standards? Which one is it?
Well, I think the question is we are compared to other, similar countries, industrialized countries, we are paying higher prices for the same exact drugs. The key difference here is that other countries have pricing mechanisms to lower prices that we in the United States don't have in the same way. Our market is called a pricing. The way that drug pricing occurs in the United States is called a market-based pricing. So in the United States, the drug manufacturer is allowed to charge whatever they want for the drug, and they calculate those prices as what the market can bear. And it's up to the market to then react and cover versus not cover the drug to give back manufacturers the signal is, was that price too high? Was that price too low? So given that we are currently paying much higher prices and we don't have mechanisms, for example, like the United Kingdom that has value-based pricing, it ties the price of the drug to the benefit that the drug introduces as compared to what is already available in the market. We don't have that in the United States. Then I think the concerns about us paying much higher prices, they are well fundamental, they are well grounded because it's the same exact drugs and prices are much higher in the United States as compared to other countries.
And doctor, now what happens to vaccine innovation if the government pulls $500 million from our mRNA research overnight?
Well, the government and the federal government, they are very important funding sources for the very basic research for all health technologies, particularly for drugs. The evidence has shown that about 100% of newly developed drugs in the last few decades have benefited from federal investment at some point in their drug development. So the federal investment is key. It is very important, particularly in the most riskiest phases of drug development, which are, the moment of drug discovery, testing new mechanisms of action, testing new molecular targets, new molecular structures, and so on. So given any changes in that funding structure, because these investments in drug development, they are decades long. The timeline for drug development is really, really long. Developing new cures, developing new drugs, takes, at least 10 years, 5 to 10 years. We had seen an expedition of those timelines during the COVID pandemic, but that required a lot of investment. And so changing the investment landscape in these very basic, very risky, very primary phases of drug development is not going to be, we will not see adjustments overnight. There will probably be a gap in that funding, and any changes to compensate.
Now, you've studied pharmaceutical systems for years. Does this administration's policy help patients at the pharmacy counter or just headlines?
Well, I think it's not only this administration, previous administrations, the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, this current administration, the issue of high drug prices has been at the forefront, and for very strong reasons. I mean, there is no other developed nation with such challenge in terms of drug affordability as the United States. And this has been at the top of policy agendas, and I think it should continue until this issue can be resolved. And the current administration has indicated that they are interested in finding a solution. Now, how effective will be the current solutions is a big question mark, because much of the solutions that the current administration has proposed, they depend on a voluntary action and a voluntary buy-in from drug manufacturers, particularly with respect to selling the drug at what is called the most favored nation pricing. The Trump administration has issued letters and has required that manufacturers consider selling drugs at the most favored nation prices, but it's still a voluntary action from pharmaceutical companies. And we will have to monitor how likely are drug manufacturers to comply and to decide to offer lower prices to the American people as compared to other countries.
Yes, and now looking at the funding cuts, Dr. Mariana, with deep cuts to NIH, CDC, as well as global aid, are we witnessing a deliberate dismantling of America's scientific engine?
Well, like I mentioned before, these funding sources are very important primarily for basic research, and that basic research is a cornerstone of drug development. And I think it is going to be a progressive change in how drugs are identified and developed and pursued and commercialized and so on. I think the pharmaceutical industry does not have clarity in the moment as what new possible funding sources could be, what new infrastructures would be available, and changes, and they're happening in real time, and how there will be response and adaptation to these changes. That's what the pharmaceutical industry is having to grapple with right now.
And Dr. Mariana, now President Trump has vowed to make healthcare affordable again, but are we getting affordability or just austerity in disguise?
Well, surveys of the American people have been consistent with respect to difficulties in access and affordability when we talk about prescription drugs specifically. Some of the estimates are very concerning. I mean, for oncology drugs, it is estimated that about 30% of prescriptions issued for a drug to treat cancer are not filled at the pharmacy because of the cost. So I think that type of metric indicates that affordability continues to be a problem in the United States when it comes to prescription drugs, and that any measures that any policies, any regulatory changes, anything that is intended to change that landscape should be carefully monitored and evaluated to make sure that the regular American in practice is having a relief from the financial burden of prescription drugs, and is having increased access to the prescription drugs. It is a very particular issue that in the United States, the patient experience, it doesn't only depend on what the drug manufacturer is charging for the drug, it also depends on what the insurance companies are requiring with respect to cost sharing on the drug. So it's, there is this intermediate in the relationship between drug prices and patient affordability. And so because of so many elements in this chain to provide coverage to Americans, that's one of the reasons why we should carefully monitor and evaluate the benefits, the impacts, and the changes over time from all of these, very recent policy changes, and really measure how they are affecting Americans and access to prescription drugs for the average person in the United States.
Thank you for sharing that. And now, Dr. Mariana, as someone inside of the world's top, best research institutions, how worried are you about long-term damage to U.S. medical leadership?
Well, I think the U.S. pharmaceutical industry is also a global industry, right? We have companies who are both located everywhere in the world. Currently, I think in the last year, there were more than 100 countries with pharmaceutical imports to the United States. So it's not a very, when we talk about pharmaceutical industry in the United States, it's not isolated from the rest of the world. We really are talking about a global pharmaceutical industry with facilities located, distributed around the globe, but also with clients in supplying to different markets around the world. So pricing trends, where is supply being allocated, where are manufacturers located, what kinds of drugs are being manufactured in each location. I think these are all characteristics that can change in result of policies, both in terms of pharmaceutical regulation, trade policy, commercial policy. So all of these changes and the recent proposals, they may have ripple effects, not only domestically in the United States, but also in the world, in the global markets, and in the global production and supply for pharmaceuticals.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mariana Socal, for sharing your invaluable expertise with us on Focal Length. It's been a privilege having you on the show. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of the Focal Length. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.